Judy Martin here at WorkLifeStation.com. This is your work and well-being update, and we've been coming to you now for, gosh, it's been a couple of years, but in 2014 we're going to be focusing a lot about work stress, and that's really what we're talking about today, to the nines for sure. I've got a very great guest with me today, a good friend of mine, Heidi Hanna. Heidi Hanna, who is a speaker, author, and health and performance expert. She's the author of the new book. I'm going to show it to everybody here. Here we go. Stressaholic. Stressaholic. Wow. That is a topic, especially as we come into 2014. A lot of research, especially last year, has been pointing to what's been going on in the brain, and especially with regard to cortisol, which is known as the stress hormone. So we're seeing more and more research about the brain and stress, and obviously the things that we can do to avoid that cortisol release. So Heidi is an expert in that. We're going to put Heidi right back on here right now. And your book is called Stressaholic, and to me, that means, well, I'm addicted to stress. So is that what happens to us, and is that what's happening now in this 24/7 high-tech marketplace?
Yeah, so I actually think stress addiction is a huge problem. I became fascinated with it a few years ago, actually, because I was dealing with so much stress personally as a speaker and traveling, and as I've mentioned in my previous book, those are the two things that freak me out more than anything, public speaking and flying. So here I am doing this on a regular basis and really decided I needed to slow down and try to relax and incorporate meditation. So I went on this relaxation vacation experiment. I called it a recharge experiment, and it was the most difficult thing I've ever done. I remember going to a spa and taking my journal with me, and the first words on the page were, "This sucks." Like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. Now, I can do a marathon and I can write a book, right? But stopping was excruciating. So I started really thinking about this. What is going on? It feels like detox. It feels like I'm missing this connection or this stimulation. And so I started looking at the research, and it turns out there's some really good stuff out there. In fact, written by the American Institute of Stress on stress addiction and what's happening in the brain and how we really crave new novel information, and we want to know what's going on all of the time. Well, now that we have access to unlimited information, there's always more we could be doing, we could be learning, we could be exploring, and so it's really difficult for us to calm down, even knowing that meditation is one of the most beneficial things to the brain. So as a trainer, I kept telling people, you know, the best thing you could do is actually slow down, but it's the last thing that anyone actually wants to do. So I always tell people a quick test to find out if you're a stress addict is to just try to do nothing for about a minute and see how that feels. And most people start to twitch just thinking about it.
You know, sometimes when I'm working with some of my students in yoga or in meditation, and I just say, okay, follow the breath and raise your hand when your attention is drawn away, and it's like, whoop, right away. No one can really, you can't even count to 10 sometimes. It takes such you know, unimaginable focus. So in your book,
and that brings up a good point. That brings up a good point. I think it's really important for people to understand is you're not going to stop thinking. So, you know, a lot of people get frustrated trying to meditate, thinking that their brain is supposed to just be still, and that's impossible. The only time that happens is when you die. So be glad.
Unless you're completely enlightened being, then you know, you're here on planet, and you have to find ways to deal with the stress. You talk about a bunch of reasons why this becomes an addiction for us, and is it more the external stressors in society, what's been going on as we evolve as a culture, or is it internal? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think that everything ultimately comes down to energy management. So looking at physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and social. And so if you look at those elements, I think there's really three main reasons we become addicted to stress. And the first one, really important, is stimulation. So we get energized by stress. That's why a lot of us wait till the last minute. I'm sure you don't, Judy, but a lot of us other people wait till the last minute to get things done because it's energizing. So we get adrenaline, and as you mentioned, cortisol, and these hormones that help us to get energy when we're feeling depleted. The problem is chronically that is inflammatory to our system, and it will literally destroy brain cells and connections in the brain. There's something called the amygdala hijack that happens when we get that fight or flight where we can't think logically and creatively. So that stimulation seems good for the short term, but it's dangerous for the long term. So that's the first thing. The second thing is distraction. So I have found in trying to quiet down and do meditation that a lot of feelings come up that maybe I don't want to deal with. So I'd rather go back to work. I'd rather start stressing about things than really deal with maybe some feelings that are under the surface of maybe loneliness or not being good enough or whatever those challenges are. We just go right back. So like any other drug, we get stimulation, we get distraction. And I think the most dangerous when it comes to this one is we get validation. So the busier we are, the more stressed we are, the more important we are in our society. So
and in our brains too.
Our brain says, I'm needed. So I remember not that long ago checking email at a stoplight, which I never do anymore, but this was a couple years ago. And I just thought, I'll just look down real quick, and I had nothing. And I started to cry. I'm like, what's wrong with me? I should be thrilled that I have nothing, but yet my validation came from being needed. And so what happens is when we start to slow down and clear away some of the noise, we might not feel needed as much. We might not feel as busy. We might not feel important. But the reality is we can be so much more effective if we target our energy to these shorter focus periods of time. So we don't want to eliminate stress. We just want to bring our best energy to those times so that we can meet stress and be resilient to it. So ultimately, everything is about oscillation. Is I'm going to deal with the stress. I'm going to be fully engaged. I'm going to have great energy. But the key is we have to oscillate. We can't stay up all the time. We can't flatline our way through the day. We have to create these ups and downs, and that's why really, to me, Stressaholic, the book, is about how do we train ourselves to be more comfortable in the periods of rest so that we can recharge our energy and then go back into the stress, meet it head on, and be extraordinary.
Yeah, I love what you just said about being extraordinary and meeting the stress head on. But in the oscillation, or what I would say the ebb and flow of that, and working with it within those cycles, I'd love you to speak to what people are talking about now about this dopamine hit. That when we get that email, when we get that text, that desire, that hit in our brain that says we are special, we are important, we're getting that email. How do we regulate that? Because that seems to be something a lot of people are talking a lot more about.
Yeah, I love that. So here's a really simple analogy that I like to use, is that stress and stimulation is a little bit like having ice cream. So we get something that ultimately we need energy, we need food, but we're getting it maybe not the right quality, maybe not the right quantity, and we're getting it all the time. So as a child, I wanted to eat ice cream for dinner, and I didn't know why that was a problem. My parents had to set some boundaries, right? Okay, you can have some ice cream, but first you have to have these other nutrients that are important to you. Well, the constant stress and the constant stimulation, and technology is a big one, those are all positive things that open up the world to us, but we can't have them all the time without boundaries. So the same thing, we get this hit of dopamine in the brain that says this is good because we're getting stimulation, we're getting validation. Our reward system wants us to stay informed and stay basically 10 steps ahead. So it says, yeah, this is good. Stay on top of the game, because if you are 10 steps ahead of everybody else, you win. The problem is you can't constantly be doing that. You have to come back and build the resilience and have that, structure to be able to, it's like a rubber band that's been used too many times. It loses that bounce back ability. So what I think is important is that we, again, set those boundaries. We recognize, have an awareness that, yes, I crave this, and yes, I want more of this, but I have to set some boundaries and some limits for myself to get the nutrients that I need, and rest and relaxation and essential nutrients from our food and positive thinking and exercise, all of those common sense things that aren't common practice, those are essentially what we need so that we can have some of the ice cream. We can have some stress, we can have some stimulation, but have everything be in that homeostatic balance.
Yeah, we are human after all. So there is that going back and forth between the stimulation and also the relaxation. I mean, everything that you just spoke about too really seems like the essence of your five-step formula. So maybe we
Hmm.
can talk a little bit about that, and you can focus on some tools that people can walk away from after watching today.
Yeah, I would love to. So the big thing that we've already been talking about is the first step, and to me it's the most important. You have to keep coming back to it, and that is rest.
Mm-hmm.
So we need rest, and that doesn't just mean sleep, although that's a great place to start, getting at least 8 or 9 hours of sleep, but building in rest periods throughout the day so that you can start to get that oscillation. My number one strategy for rest is to look at your lifestyle and see where you're getting stimulation that you might want to decrease.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, as a nutritionist, I like to look a lot at food intake and the foods that are causing internal stress. Because a lot of times we think about all the external stress going on, but not the fact that caffeine, alcohol, sugar,
Sugar.
a lot of our wheat, soy, corn, the foods that are inflammatory in nature, if we get too much of those, we're in an internal state of chronic stress. And that's going to make us less resilient to all the things going on externally.
That's a great point that few people talk about.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I work with people, again, I'm mostly within the yoga, the breathing, the mindset, but we'll have sit down and maybe have lunch together if we're doing a full day intensive, and I see what they're eating and I see what I'm eating. I'm
Mm.
thinking there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
I never thought though about this idea of internal stress. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Gosh, I would love to. It's such a big part of my focus right now is helping people identify hidden stressors in their system. So we focus so much on what's going on externally, but ultimately we can be more resilient. If our system is more resilient, we can take on the stress that's outside. But if our system is under chronic inflammation, or if we have food sensitivities or environmental toxins, if we're not getting enough sleep, if we're not moving regularly, or if we're exercising too much. It's anytime our system is out of balance, then we become less resilient to everything. And more people now are struggling with chronic fatigue, adrenal dysfunction, burnout. And so what happens is the only way that they can feel energized is to push the limit. So now they become addicted to exercise. They're pushing themselves too hard
And
because
coffee
that's the
and espresso.
exactly, all
Yeah.
these external stimulants. So
Mhm.
ultimately, it is a little bit like going through detox, where you have to
Mhm.
look at yourself and check under the hood and do some systemic testing. So that's one of the things I've started to do is look at cortisol patterns, food
Mhm.
sensitivities, how your system is digesting, how your oxidation process is working, metabolic processes, so that you can get as strong as possible and resilient as possible as a system.
Mhm. Oops.
It's how we build our resilience to that stress. So that's a big focus.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know I caught you off guard there, and I sort of went off the
Yeah.
tangent of the five
No, it's
principles, but
great.
I think that that's something that people really want to hear about, and that a lot of
Yeah.
that is brand new information to me, and I'm sure it is to a lot of
Yeah.
people who are watching. So going back to the five principles,
You bet.
maybe we'll just get through them real quick,
Absolutely.
and then focus on one or two
Perfect.
to give people some more information. So number one, rest, and
Rest. And that's
big
okay
fan
that
of
we
that.
spent more time because ultimately
Uh-huh.
we have to go back to rest. If you
Yeah.
find yourself struggling with the other steps, go back to rest. It means your system's out of balance. So we want to get that,
Okay.
homeostatic balance first. So that's okay. So the other ones we'll move through quickly. Repair is about, building the essential nutrients that we need. So in rest, we're eliminating things that are stressful.
Mhm.
In repair, we're adding things that are nourishing. So the right foods, the right supplementation,
Mhm.
positive thinking is a big one. Writing down gratitude lists in the morning builds, more of those positive endorphins in the brain. That's nourishment. That's repairing some of the damage that we've done in the past.
Psychological and physical. I mean, we're going right the gambit
Absolutely.
here. Okay.
Yep. And in the book, everything looks at how it impacts the mind and how it impacts the body in both of those
Mm.
strategies. So the third one is to rebuild, and this is where we actually look for a little bit of stress at a time, and then we get recovery. So we're really using that idea of oscillation through things like interval training, strength training in the gym.
Mhm.
How do we build a body that's stronger and a mind that's stronger through focused periods of what I call mind-sight meditation, which is really practicing meditation specific to some sort of outcome like focus or creativity. The last two are really how you reprogram your lifestyle. So we talked rest, repair, rebuild. The last two are rethink, which is changing the way we see stress as a challenge instead of a threat. And the last one is to reprogram or redesign our rituals. So how do we build in the simple things in our day that are going to allow us, and it is built like a pyramid, as much as I hate pyramids because they're overdone, but it looks like a collapsible pyramid, and it's intentional because as you build that, if you, this is one of my favorite things, I think is super, super important for those of you who are into positive psychology. It's great to think positively, but if you're not getting rest, if your chemical system is out of balance, your brain is not going to work appropriately, right? So all the positive sayings in the world, all of the gratitude lists and blessing journals, there's times you sit down and think, I got nothing. You know, so we have to start at the systemic point of getting rid of some of that stress, rebuilding our system, and then the brain has the brain chemistry it needs to use positive thinking and create rituals that are going to sustain that over time.
Rituals to me are number one because it has to do with self-care, and when you have the self-discipline, you move into self-care, then you become self-confident as well in moving forward. When you speak about the cycles, I've been doing some research on ultradian cycle, which I guess there's so many, or healing response, there's so many different names for it. But when you talk about this interval training, I mean, you really focus, you're talking a lot about performance athletes, and there's a lot of research that we can learn from them in the way they do things. What's a takeaway for us normal people, or at least me, I'm a normal person, when it comes to the way these athletes are able to focus their mind, rest when they need to, eat what they need to, and then stay within that that cycle, which some scientists say is, look, you can go full throttle for an hour and a half. I mean, personally, I think it's more like 2 hours, and then I take a rest, like a real 20-minute rest. What's your opinion about that as a stress expert?
Yeah. Well, I would say one thing on that. It was pretty clear in the research. It used to be 90 minutes was kind of that ultimate performance cycle. I think it's becoming less. I know you want to push it to more because you're a stressaholic. But it's becoming
well, I do get up in between. I walk probably every 20 minutes or so, but when I stop, it's probably easier for me.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, the key is that the less resilient we are, the more breaks we need. The more stress we have, the more breaks we need. So I would say that there's so many things from the field of athletics and performance, but I think the number one takeaway is the story that you tell yourself about your need for recovery. So I was a collegiate softball pitcher, and, you know, I knew
I can totally see that about you. I can totally see that.
That's a whole nother story, yeah. A whole other story. But you know, we knew that we could only throw a certain number of innings in a game, or a certain number of games in a day. I mean, there was a time I threw 6 games in a day, which was ridiculous. I was like 12 years old. My resilience was strong. We were in the national championship. Again, another story. But the key is that you have a story that says, as an athlete, I know that my muscles can only take a certain amount of stress before they need that recovery. They have to repair. You can't do strength training every single day. You can't tear down the muscle without building it back up, or you're going to hurt yourself, right?
Of course, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So what is it that makes us think that we can stress our brain over and over and over all day long and never give it the chance? It is part of the body. It does, you know, suffer from a lot of wear and tear, and same thing with our internal system. When we have that chronic inflammation, we're beating our system down. It's like we're just going nonstop. So I think the key in sports is that they recognize, in order for me to be successful and perform at my best, recovery is not an option. There are mandatory recovery days and recovery rituals, sitting in an ice bath, getting stimulation, you know, whatever it might be, that we need to look at it the same. In order for my brain to perform at its best, I have to allow that recovery time. I have to get a massage. I have to do meditation. I have to eat right. It shouldn't be an option. Once you believe that story, then you can look at the rituals that are really common sense and make them part of your common practice. And you do it a little bit at a time, build them in. The better you feel, the more likely you are to stick with it.
I loved what you said before, that things seem like they're common sense, but until they become common practice, we're not doing anyone any good, really, including ourselves.
I'll tell you one last little mini story. A couple of years ago, after I wrote my first book, I was getting ready to give a presentation, and the person introducing me, of course, gave my bio, and I always sit back and think, wow, that sounds really good. I'm doing pretty good, feeling good about myself. And then she said, I just read Heidi's book, and you know, it's just common sense. And I felt like someone stabbed me in the heart. I had all this self-talk of like, oh, it's just common sense. Anyone could have written that. You're not good enough. You shouldn't be doing this. And so I got up on stage and I said, you know, after years of research and working on this book, everyone wants to hear it's just common sense, and everyone kind of laughed. And I said, you know what, though, I found in my 10 years of doing this, common sense is not common practice. And so you can say as much as you want, this stuff is just common sense, everybody knows it, but hardly anyone's doing it. We have to get the common sense and align it with a story that says this is important to me and here's why, and then a little bit at a time we can start to retrain the way that the brain operates so that it pulls us in that direction instead of us getting up and trying to drag ourselves through the process.
When you're talking about this retraining and the rewiring of the brain, we're talking about ritual. And it's not this esoteric thing anymore. It's really, what are you going to do? What habits can you change or work on or modify on a day-to-day basis that you can build up, this set of resilience tools, resiliency within your body, your brain, your mind, your spirit, everything. And I think that we don't pay enough attention on a day-to-day basis. In your book, if someone were to pick up your book and they said, look, I'm a complete stressaholic, what are the first 3 things that they could do? What are the first 3 places they could go in your book to get maybe a little bit, a little piece of wisdom?
Wow. Okay. So one thing I will say is that in the steps that I go through at the end of each chapter, there's what I call a stepping stone. And that is an idea and a particular meditation that you can listen to or walk yourself through to start training some of these ideas. So there's one based on rest and one based on repair. I also have them at my website, which I know is on here, synergyprograms.com. If you go to the Stressaholic page at the bottom, there are some audio clips. There's nothing fancy. They're literally me, just my voice walking you through this process so that you can hear it and you can start to practice it, and just like 90 seconds at a time start to actually incorporate those stepping stones. So I think that's probably a good place to start.
Great.
And to do something, like you said, every single day. When you wake up in the morning, think about, how do I get my brain into a state where it's going to support me in doing what I want to do? And I'll be writing a lot more about what I call my bop, my brain bop, where I bop myself in the head in the morning to optimize how my brain works. But it's basically move my body, move my body a little bit, think a little bit more positively, and then focus on who I want to be before I figure out what I want to do with my day. So get your brain to be in the right state before you start taking on everything that you're going to take on. Because again, the stress is going to be there. Ultimately, it's about how we build our resilience to be able to handle the stress in a way that's healthy, happy, and then we grow from the stress of our life instead of breaking down. That's important.
It becomes the framework for personal growth, really, to move forward, and not only to just become resilient, but to use that and that strength and that energy to kind of catapult us creatively, I think,
absolutely,
to the next level. I know that, when I woke up this morning, I woke up and I went, oh, Heidi, I'm going to interview Heidi today. That was the first thing. And then I went
I hope
right
it was a good thing.
No, it was a good thought.
You sound like you're terrified.
Well, it's just I knew that would begin the day of a long process. So immediately I stop, I do my breathwork exercises, I do a little stretching, and then move forward from there. But there are days when you wake up and you run out the door, and I think the other thing that we can do is give ourselves permission to fall off the wagon on occasion.
Absolutely.
And, that's when I go to chocolate chip ice cream personally, but what are you going to do? So.
And that's okay, right? Because as long as that's not what you're having all day
or every day.
Exactly. Because if you build up your system, you can have that ice cream, you can enjoy it, you don't become addicted to it because you're getting everything else that you need. Yeah, it's all moderation, it's all that common sense stuff we've been hearing
all
for
that
years.
Common sense stuff and the stuff that we don't do, quite frankly. I know, it's just every day is a new beginning. So once again, thank you to Heidi Hanna, author, speaker, health and performance expert. She is the author of Stressaholic. This is her second big book there. The Sharp Solution is the first one. That's how I came to know Heidi, who has been an incredible mentor and friend along the way. So Heidi, once again, thank you for joining me here at Work Life Nation, the work and well-being update here, and the first one for 2014. So make it a good one, folks.
Right.
All right, have a good one. Judy Martin here. We'll see you next time.